But getting back to the trivia on the news, I won't bother even repeating the awful stuff that they're giving out as news now because it's rubbish, utter trivia and rubbish. I'll talk about propaganda, because you're given propaganda which really comes through neuroscience today, and you have these guys calling it neuroscience, not just psychology, but neuroscience. How to manipulate public opinion constantly, and it's through all government ads, it's through all general ads, by the way, because Madison Avenue is a big part of the establishment, and it's through all your entertainment, and it's quite simple to do, really. But anyway, getting back to Bertrand Aldous Huxley, I'll mention him in his book, Brave New World Revisited, where he tells you how they can bring in this type of system and how they probably will. And he talks on propaganda. He uses Hitler. They always use Hitler for an example. They never use Stalin and so on, because communism is almost a holy thing for these guys since they set it all up. But they talk about Adolf Hitler, how he used a lot of techniques that they use today. Motivational research was a thing that he was already into, what really worked on the masses. And he would use unqualified assertions and sweeping generalizations. He says, these are the propagandist's stock in trade. All effective propaganda, Hitler wrote, must be confined to a few bare necessities, and then must be expressed in a few stereotyped formulas. Global warming, weapons of mass destruction, and so on, that kind of stuff. It says, in a few stereotyped formulas. These stereotyped formulas must be constantly repeated, for only constant repetition will finally succeed in imprinting an idea upon the memory of a crowd. And Hitler said the same thing. People were just a crowd. Individuals don't fall for it, but the crowd does, you see. Philosophy teaches us to feel uncertain about the things that seem to us self-evident. Propaganda, on the other hand, teaches us to accept as self-evident matters about which it would be reasonable to suspend our judgment or to feel doubt. The aim of the demagogue is to create social coherence under his own leadership. But as Bertrand Russell has pointed out, systems of dogma without empirical foundations, such as scholasticism, Marxism, and fascism, have the advantage of producing a great deal of social coherence amongst their disciples. The demagogic propagandist must therefore be consistently dogmatic, always dogmatic in their statements. It's climate change, global warming. No matter if it's pouring down rain or it's snowing and you're up to your eyeballs in it. All his statements are made without qualifications, and that's what you get. No qualifications. Any study they've done it proves the opposite. There are no greys in his picture of the world. Everything's either diabolically black or celestially white. In Hitler's words, the propagandist should adopt a systematically one-sided attitude towards every problem that has to be dealt with. He must never admit that he might be wrong, or that people with a different point of view might even partially be right. And you find that with all these things that are put for the carbon taxes coming and the global warming and all that. They're completely dogmatic about it. They're all on board, as they say. Their opinions are all unified. Opponents should not be argued with. They should be attacked, shouted down, or if they become too much of a nuisance, liquidated. The morally squeamish intellectual may be shocked by this kind of thing, but the masses are always convinced that right is on the side of the active aggressor. And isn't that true? Isn't that true? The active aggressor gets the confidence of the public. Such then was Hitler's opinion of humanity in the mass. It was a very low opinion. Was it also an incorrect opinion? The tree is known by its fruits, and a theory of human nature which inspired the kinds of techniques that proved so horribly effective must contain at least an element of truth. Virtue and intelligence belong to human beings as individuals freely associating with each individuals in small groups. So do sin and stupidity. But the subhuman mindlessness to which the demagogue makes his appeal, the moral imbecility on which he relies when he goads his victim into action, are characteristics not of men and women as individuals, but of men and women in masses. Think of music television, folks. They're turning every female into a lesbian whore. Have you listened to the words and stuff? Have you listened to any of the words? But that's for the mass woman, you see, not for the individual. There's too few individuals in male or females. Mindlessness and moral idiocy are not characteristically human attributes. They are symptoms of, listen to this, herd poisoning. And again, that's music, television, that's your entertainment industry and so on. It's done on purpose too, by the way, because there's an agenda behind it and a reason for it. Herd poisoning. And all the world's higher religions, salvation and enlightenment are for individuals. And that's true too. People miss that point. They always attack the mass church. They never understand that true religion can only appeal to the thinking intellectual. It's not something you just dump yourself in a bucket of water and you suddenly see the light, or get on your knees like Mason with a blindfold and your chest exposed and your pants rolled up. I mean, it's actually an inner thing that happens to the person, the individual. There's nowhere where Jesus says he came to save the world. Far from it. It says he came to save the few. And he talked about the broad way. It was for the masses. And the road to heaven was very narrow, and few would find it. Anyway, and it's the same in other religions too. It's for the few who understand the higher meanings. So the kingdom of heaven is within the mind of a person, not within the collective mindlessness of a crowd. Christ promised to be present where 2 or 3 are gathered together. He did not say anything about being present where thousands are intoxicating one another with herd poison. Look at the tent preachers on television today with their buckets of money going round as they pretend to heal people. Under the Nazis, enormous numbers of people were compelled to spend an enormous amount of time marching in serried ranks from point A to point B and back again to point A. This keeping of the whole population on the march seemed to be a senseless waste of time and energy. Only much later, adds Hermann Rauschening, was there revealed in it a subtle intention based on a well-judged adjustment of ends and means. Marching diverts men's thoughts. Marching kills thought. It kills thought. That's what the army's for, to make you uniform. Marching makes an end of individuality. Marching is the indispensable magic stroke performed in order to accustom the people to a mechanical, quasi-ritualistic activity until it becomes second nature. So Hitler was perfectly correct in his estimate of human nature. To those of us who look at men and women as individuals rather than as members of crowds or of regimented collectives, he seems hideously wrong. In an age of accelerating overpopulation or of accelerating overorganization and ever more efficient means of mass communication, he says, how can we preserve the integrity and reassert the value of the human individual? This is a question that can still be asked and perhaps effectively answered. A generation from now, it may be too late to find an answer, and perhaps impossible in the stifling collective climate of that future time, even to ask the question. So, you got to understand, you're not really... I always say to people, who are you? And because they'll ask you who you are. What they really mean is, what are you? And they judge you by what you do. And what you do will generally tell them what you think that your bank account will be. That's how people judge you in a commercialized system. But when I ask them, who are you? And they give you a name, I said, no, that's not what I mean. Who are you? I want to know who you are as a person. And what they'll try to do right after that is to give you all the things that would satisfy a herd mentality with their answers. They will not try and tell you who they really are as a person, what they think about things, what they're uncomfortable about in society and stuff like that. They'll try to give you all the status quo, politically correct answers. He goes on in this book too. He says, in the 2 preceding chapters I've described the techniques of what may be called wholesale mind manipulation as practiced by the greatest demagogue and the most successful salesman in recorded history. But no human problem can be solved by wholesale methods alone. The shotgun has its place, but so has the hypodermic syringe. In the chapters that follow, I shall describe some of the more effective techniques for manipulating not crowds, not entire publics, but isolated individuals. In the course of this epoch-making experiments on the conditioned reflex, Ivan Pavlov, that monster of a person, I added that part in, observed that when subjected to prolonged physical or psychic stress, lab animals exhibit all the symptoms of a nervous breakdown. Well, that's what they had. Refusing to cope any longer with the intolerable situation, their brains go on strike, so to speak, and either stop working altogether, the dog loses consciousness, or he also resorts to slowdowns and sabotage. The dog behaves unrealistically or develops a kind of Physical symptoms which in a human being we should call hysteria. Some animals are more resistant to stress than others. Dogs processing what Pavlov called strong excitatory constitutions break down much more quickly than dogs of a merely lively disposition as opposed to a choleric or agitated temperament. Similarly, weak inhibitory dogs reach the end of their tether much sooner than do calm, imperturbable dogs. But even the most stoical dog is unable to resist indefinitely. You understand, he's not talking about dogs here, and Pavlov wasn't interested in just how dogs, they wanted to know how people would react. That's what all experiments are about, ultimately. If the stress to which he is subjected is sufficiently intense or sufficiently prolonged, he will end by breaking down as abjectly and as completely as the weakest of his kind. Pavlov's findings were confirmed in the most distressing manner on a very large scale during the 2 world wars as a result of the single catastrophic experience of a succession of terrors, less appalling but frequently repeated. Soldiers develop a numbing or disabling psychophysical symptom, temporary unconsciousness, extreme agitation, lethargy, functional blindness, or paralysis, completely unrealistic responses to the challenges of events, strange responses, strange reversals to lifelong patterns of behavior. All the symptoms which Pavlov observed in his dogs reappeared among the victims of what in the First World War was called shell shock, in the second battle fatigue. Every man, like every dog, has his own individual limit of endurance. Most men reach their limits after about 30 days of more or less continuous stress under the conditions of modern combat. The more than average susceptible succumb in only 15 days. See, it's not normal to go out and slaughter folk. That's why they have to train you to slaughter people and kill other people you don't even know. An army's very good at that. That's its job. It's to train you to go off and slaughter people you don't know. And maybe even to like it for some. And it's not normal either to be chased up a battlefield with a shell chasing you the size of a Volkswagen that blows everything to pieces when it lands. This is a form of madness, you understand. And it's economic war too. The guy who's going to get blown to bits hasn't got a clue of the big corporations that are involved in this and who's going to profit. He's not been told that within his propaganda sphere. Anyway, the more than average tough can resist for 45 or even 50 days. Strong or weak in the long run, all of them break down. All that is to say of those who are initially sane. For ironically enough, the only people who can hold up indefinitely under the stress of modern war are psychotics. Interesting, eh? Individual insanity is immune to the consequences of collective insanity. So you have to be psychotic. Have you noticed too, the soldiers can keep going back for tour after tour, year after year today? Have you noticed that's what all the drugs are on? And the better psychological conditioning they get and training to be impersonal about slaughtering folk and to feel good about it. I've always thought it odd when your propaganda goes in any country and they show you some soldiers coming home and they always show you the loving wife and maybe a child or two and the hugs and they're so happy to be back. But this guy's just come back from slaughtering other mothers and children somewhere else across the planet. There's something wrong here, you know. As I say, this character too will give you the pat answers of his propaganda. We're over there to bring them democracy and give them freedom. And all that rubbish, when you know damn well that Chase and all the rest of the big corporations are involved with the war and massive profits, and they're all getting dibs on first grabs and everything to be had in the land that's going to be conquered and plundered. Nothing changes, just better techniques of brainwashing. This is the fact that every individual has his breaking point has been known and in a crude, unscientific way exploited from time immemorial. In some cases, man's dreadful inhumanity to man has been inspired by the love of cruelty for its own horrible and fascinating sake. More often, however, pure sadism was tempered by utilitarianism, theology, or reasons of state. They goes into physical torture. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, I'm back and we're cutting through the matrix, talking about reality and how reality is manipulated, and it's always manipulated by propaganda from many, many sources. And people today are trained, of course, not to listen in silence to anything. They've got to have a radio blaring or a television blaring or on the cell phone or something blaring or occupied by a game or whatever it happens to be. You've not been taught to sit and think for yourself. There's a peace, that can come when you sit and think for yourself. It's quite amazing to try it. Personally, I think a lot of folk have never done it in their whole lives.